She stood on the skybridge where the wind forgot to bow to anyone, not even to dragons. Below her, a gulf of air fell away toward the fiery glow that lived at the heart of the city. Even at this hour, when the light was neither moon nor sun but the ghost of both, the 14 flames breathed. The mountain mouths sighed in long, low bellows that ached through basalt and fused stone, shook the glyph-carved balustrades and sent a tremor through Valyora's bones. The city was a crown of obsidian teeth set about a ring of constant dawn, and the brightness staining the clouds from beneath was the color of a pomegranate seed held against a lamp. Kalex stirred on the adamantine perch, a mountain of shadow folded upon itself, wings furled so close that they might have been carven planes of black glass. One wide golden eye opened, a slit of molten metal fixed upon her. Valyria rested her palm to his jaw hinge, just beneath a broad plate of scale where the heat always gathered. It felt like leaning to a coal in a brazier without burning. It was the sort of heat that got inside the wrist and climbed the forearm until it was part of the person touching it. When she was a child, she had thought dragons borrowed warmth from those who stroked them. Now she knew he had a furnace of his own. "Hush," she said, because she always did. The word broke open a thin mist that had settled upon the bridge. "We won't fly tonight." The eye shut again with confidence that the decision was hers to make. In truth, Kalex flew when Kalex wanted. He was older than most men calling themselves elders and younger than the city that fed him. He had been hatched on a bed of pumice-like ash and blue-black sand in the shadow of the third flame, and though she had not been there to see it, she had only 4 years then. She had been told the shell had cracked like a thunderclap and a weight of smoke rolled down the slope into the sea. Her mother had said that all things that lived here were born to a sound like thunder or a light like lightning. Valyria had not been born in such a fashion. She had come quietly, her father said, and with her tiny hand closed on the midwife's thumb, a mild, stubborn baby that had refused to cry even when they expected it. Her mother had laughed at that story once and said, "She cried later." From this bridge, the Targaryen Aerie spread upward and downward in interwoven arms and cavities and towers. The architecture grew like coral had it been trained by a mind that loved symmetry and firelight. Bridges spanned misty wells. Colonnades poured themselves into staircases that sprang toward terraces like black vines. Windows were teeth, doors tongues, and archways eyelids. The older parts bore the shimmer of true fusion. Silica run under discipline until stone ceased to be a collection of parts and learned to be continuous. In newer editions, basalt blocks had been sprayed and heated until their seams vanished in an approximation of that earlier seamlessness. Valyria always knew which joined where. The living fused stone was warmer on the hollow of her throat when she stood near it. She watched the movement of the city as a seamstress watches the movement of a cloth she has not sewn but must wear. Slender figures passed through light without haste. Somewhere, on a terrace that faced one of the lesser vents, a group of lithe musicians were shaping air with bone flutes and curving bronze horns. Their melody wandered through scales that did not believe in resolution. A robe of dyed silk flared over the edge of a balcony like a fire's tongue and vanished into privacy. 2 apprentices led a young bronze dragon along a roadway of paving glass that had been laid only last year, the animal walking with its talons held high in a ritual prance. Across the way, the terrace of the Bellarys family hung with a fall of chain like rain that had been caught and polished and pinned into place. Orange-blue light breathed through the links as if a living thing hid there. The air smelled of water that had been boiled inside rock. It also smelled, faintly, of cooked meat and of anise from the tea vats that kept a silent watch in the night. At this hour, most of the freehold's affairs had done what they could do and moved from argument into contemplation. Houses that never loved each other learned how to be neighbors in the dark. Valyria leaned her forearms on the railing and looked down into the glow of the distant lava lake. There was a superstition that one could send thought down into the fire and it would return bearing an answer. That was childish and she would not confess it aloud, but she had done it twice. She had been answered once or believed that she had. It was not that the fire had spoken in her blood or put words in her mind. It was that the heat made a single idea expand until there was no room for any other. The thought she had sent down that night had been, "Should I go away?" The answer had been the certainty that she could not remain. Nothing as fragile as a string of words had come. Yet the next morning she had wakened with a resolve crystallized inside her like salt in brine. From the approach behind her she heard shoes that did not bother to hide their sound. Few did in this eyrie. The family preferred to announce itself rather than appear. She turned before the shoes stopped, which allowed the man walking toward her to be pleased at finding her already preparing the smile that was the one she saved for him. "You find the same bridge every night," Emian said. "It finds me," Valyria replied. He reached the balustrade, propped his elbows where she had, and looked down with a theatrical wince. Emian's robe had fallen off one shoulder and his hair, white blonde, their family's telling color, was tied back with 3 bronze pins set with dark stones. He wore his rings because he always wore his rings, modes of memory manifested as metal. He did not like to remove symbols once he had accepted them. "Gods," he murmured, a word he did not otherwise like to use. "It's like looking into a throat." "Do not say that to Mother," Valyria said lightly. "She does not care for the poet in you. She does not care for the gambler in me," Emian corrected. "And the poet in anyone is a gambler's impatient cousin." He watched the first lights of morning gather behind the plumes. The sky over the sea took on a rim of gray-green, as if it were bruising. "He will want you to say yes," Emian said after a moment. "He already knows that I have," she returned without moving. "Of course he does," her brother answered, and let a sigh slip out as if it were a coin he could afford to spend. "I thought you might make him ask." Valyria rested her chin on the back of her hand and pointed with the other, not toward the far slopes and their forges and their practiced chaos, but toward a much nearer tower whose top was open to air and the trapped moon. It rose from the airie's inner courts like a spear left leaning there by a god. In its hollow, around a table that had been in use since the freehold emerged from villages into instruments, Mehran Targaryen and 3 other lords were speaking into the night. Their glass candles were lit, one green, one black, one pale as winter skulls, smeared light that did not spread the way firelight spread, but instead cut narrow channels through shadow as if it were drilling with a jeweled bit. "Tonight," Valyria said, "he is telling them, or asking them, or arranging the fiction by which asking becomes telling." Emian's smile was swift and conspiratorial. He looked put upon by affection, as if he had always wanted to be the sort of man who did not care, and yet had grown into the sort who cared without ever agreeing to it. "So, you take a ship, an entourage, a dragon, and a mirror-polished tongue to a western city that prides itself on being older than us in the way that a tree is older than fire. You will stand in their squares and pretend to be charmed, and you will make their finest men feel as if the thing they fear most has arrived, not to subjugate them, but to admire their gardens." "I admire gardens," Valyria said. "I would admire theirs. I admire dice that fall the way I need them to," Emian countered. "You are more honest than I am." "I am just better at making honesty resemble flattery," she said, because he would enjoy the idea. He shook his head and, for a moment, she saw beneath his playfulness the piece of him that did calculations when the room was not watching. "It should have been me," he said. "We do not know that it will be anything worth mourning that it was not," she replied, but she heard the sting she could not remove from words when words could not change a fact. Their father had chosen. Emian's dragon, Temis, had not yet learned to consent to the exhaustion of the sea. Valyria's had. There were other reasons. The measured coolness her face could become, the way crowds unwound around her. But that pragmatic one had made arguing superfluous. Emian lifted one ringed hand and drew a line in air. A boyish gesture clung to out of habit. "Bring me something from their city," he said. "Bring me a sound. I have seen their coin and tasted their wine. I want something I cannot hold." "Very well," Valyria said. "I will bring you the noise their river makes when the tide fights it and loses." His grin returned in full, quick as a bird's turn. "That is brotherly generosity I can believe in," he said, and then, as if the levity could not carry what had to be carried, he soberly added, "Right, even if the candles will tell you that words take too long, even if he tells you messages are better carried in dreams than ink, I will write." she said. She knew he was thinking of their mother, of the long illness that did not call itself an illness, of Delessa's body that forgot pain only when she wore so much gold that it fooled her into feeling heavy on purpose. Their mother would not come out onto this bridge anymore. The sight of light reflected on scales made her teeth ache, she said. She never said what else it made ache. They stood without speaking until the brightness beneath the city grew strong enough to turn the undersides of the clouds into hammered copper. And then Emion pushed away from the balustrade and kissed his sister just once near the corner of the eye. "Go sleep," he told her, gently rude, as only a brother could be without earning offense. "Go sleep and dream of a city built low instead of high." She watched him leave and turned back to Kalex, who had opened his eye again and made a tiny sound like metal cooling in water. "We will not be long," she told him. "We will look and listen and return." Kalex breathed out. The breath made a steam out of the thin vapor that had settled near the bridge and sent it crawling over the stone like a living thing. Valyria drew her robe around her and stepped back into the Ares passages, where the heat was softer and the light less theatrical, and the smell of home came down like a familiar shawl. Master Erdas was awake before the bells of the Forge Quarter sent their first slow strokes across the city. He preferred to beat sound to its destinations. He had been a boy beside a canal when the men in arched helmets came to his father's olive press. He had thought their armor was a sculpture because he had never seen metal glimmer like that except in images, and they were not cruel, not the way the stories wanted such men to be, not the way the fevers of his later years would have furnished the memory if he let them. They had bought oil at a decent price and looked beyond his mother's face because their custom made them believe that looking was ownership. Ownership, not gaze, had been their obsession. It had taken him years to learn that the most dangerous men were those who truly believed that what they saw they had saved. He lit his lamp not out of superstition but because he hated to begin. Writing in the dark. The lamp took and held its fire. He shaded his eyes while it decided what sort of flame it would be today, and then he dipped his pen. His hand moved steadily even when his thoughts were generous and wandered. He was a freedman, but the line the brush laid down did not wobble with that anxious gratitude. He had been freed long enough to forget the precise year. He remembered the day because it had rained and because the man he had been then could not at first understand why the rain on his hair felt different. In these hours he did the thing that paid him, and then he did the thing that belonged to him. He wrote letters for the house and drafted contracts in terms of fire and air and legalisms that had been hammered smooth by generations of lawyers who had understood that victory often came to those who respected words as weapons. The Targaryen contracts were seldom as ruthless as the Bellarese or the Carrarian documents. His employer's hand was a scalpel, not a hammer. Erdas had never been asked to write an edict that felt like a death warrant. He had written several that felt like warnings. When those were finished, he turned to his own parchment, less expensive, more precious, and added another few lines to the story that had been writing itself inside him for years. He did not think of it as a story most days. He thought of it as a speaking instrument smashed into letters. It was a record of what he had seen and what he had misunderstood and what he had seen again under light he had only learned to call by its true name much later. He did not flatter himself that anyone would want to read it. He wrote out of stubbornness and out of the certainty that there is a difference between a life past and a life recorded. His room looked down into one of the Targaryen inner courts that had been allowed to keep green. Nothing in Valyria was natural in the way other cities meant it. Everything was an argument with elements that often conceded out of admiration. This court grew its wide-leafed plants in troughs of volcanic soil, arranged under a system of stone flutes that brought water in measured intervals and then whisked it away. There were figs here and fennel and a dark herb that had no name in the languages Erdas spoke. Small white insects clung to the underside of 2 leaves and did not move, as if there were nothing left they desired. A servant sang in one of the side passages, low enough not to commit offense. His voice made Erdas's mouth turn upward despite himself. Songs in this city were often about skill, composed to praise a craftsman's innovation in verse that sounded like a blueprint. This one was about a woman who wove hair-fine glass into the hair of her bridegroom, and how the light in the room forgot itself and ran toward them both because it had never seen such a thing. Erdas loved stories that believed light could forget. By the time the bells finally sent their metal speech loping past his window, the household was multiplying its faces. Men and women came from rooms in their small networks of loyalty. The necessary vendors approached and settled their baskets. The day's carved stone orders were reviewed and altered with the brisk cruelty of exacting taste. Erdas cleaned his pen and went to the antechamber where those who were not family but were not merchants either waited to be summoned, dismissed, or instructed. He was sitting rigidly upright so that his back would not betray his years when Valyria emerged from the interior court, her hair braided high with a ribbon in it like a narrow strip of sky. "Master Erdas," she said, pausing out of the decency that had made even some of his enemies fail to hate her fully. There is a list. There always is. Have you time to take it?" "There is nothing I have that cannot be paused for this," he answered truthfully. She did not smile as if he had flirted, because she never did. She looked down at the small sheet she had folded in thirds. "I would like 4 more rolls of instrument silk from the East store, and perhaps a second set of travel chains for Kalex's talons. The old ones chafe when the weather flips. We must send polite letters to the houses that cannot be included in the embassy without including the houses that will not abide them. An apology that is not an apology, and a promise that is not a promise, and an invitation that cannot be accepted." "You will want 3 drafts," Erdas said, thinking of how lords read as if reading itself were a duel. "I will want 5, she amended. "But you will want only 2, so we will have 3. She made a small motion with her hands, the sort he had learned meant she was about to ask something that she had not yet decided whether to ask. "I would like to order a set of luck stones if we can procure them, those that vibrate when exposed to the voice. A necklace, perhaps, for my mother. It might soothe her, or it might only distract her while she believes in it. I do not know which I want." "We can obtain them and not inquire which they are," Erdas said. He kept his own voice plain, the way a carpenter keeps his chisel even and dry. Valyria's gaze moved past his shoulder for a moment, and he turned to see what had taken it. A page stood half in shadow with a bundle of rods bound in red hide. The rods were used to whisper messages from certain chambers to others via a system of resonance along heated metal. One slid a rod into a slot and plucked it, and its twin would sing its message. There were 5 rods. That was either exciting or worrisome, and the red bindings meant the messages did not wish delay. "Father," Valyria asked the heir, amused and a little exasperated, as if the rods were his children. "They require you in the steeple chamber," the page said, drawing the words back from their rehearsed phrasing like a curtain. Valyria inclined her head in acknowledgement and then turned again to Erdas. "I will send a full list before noon." Then, with a small curve of the mouth that was not quite a smile, "You will not be on this ship, Master Erdas. You are a piece that anchors other pieces." "I am exactly where I can do the most good," Erdas answered. He had thought through the jealousy and put it away as a coat that did not fit him, but still the admission snagged somewhere near his ribs. "I will write those drafts in such a way that even those who are insulted will not be certain whether it is their fault." "We do not wish to insult," Valyria said, reflexive, and then she let her hand open in allowance. "We do wish to make it inconvenient to object." "Ah," Erdas said, "then I will write them perfectly." He watched her cross the court and climb the last few steps to the steeple chamber. The tower was not tall by the city's immodest standards, but it had a clear view over the lower terraces, and one could stand there and pretend to see all things one needed to see. He had gone up only twice, both times accompanying a man with more rings than sense and more sense than others gave him credit for. One always saw less from a height than one believed. By late afternoon, when the day had finished warming itself and decided to cool again, the emissaries from Volantis arrived in their barges trimmed with dyed silks that had seen too much sunlight. They bore letters signed with a triumvirate sigil so intricate that it seemed designed to excuse its readers from understanding it. They were received and sent away again with courtesy and the bare promise of review, because the freehold did not bend to outside urgency unless it had already chosen to do so. Erdas drafted 3 notes for Valyria's later correction and watched as her father's scribes carried their own stacks across the court like ants moving eggs to a safer nest. All day the city breathed around its own heart. When night fell, the glass candles were lit in the biggest rooms, and the shadow work began anew. On the third morning after the rods had sung Valyria's name, a caravan left the area at dawn to travel the short road down to the harbor terraces that belonged to the family. Wagons carried chests with inferior gold hidden under barley and good gold hidden under sheets of inferior tin. Cases of scrolls, bundles of woven cloth and armor, crates of metal cages meant to hold flammable oils that would be lashed to a dragon's harness in case cruelty became necessary. Those crates were loaded without comment and covered quickly. The men and women who moved them did not look at one another as they did so, as if eye contact would make something difficult to bear become something shameful to consider. In the stables constructed for beasts that were not dragons, dusty-eyed horses held their heads as if offended by life. The carriage that would carry the casks of water for Kalex had been reinforced, and the casks themselves lined with thin sheets of hammered obsidian to keep the water cool. A dozen women from households allied to the Targaryens had come to see the embassy off without a hint that they were there to gossip about it later. Valyria's mother did not come. She sent her necklace bearing the ancient, much-whispered sigil of the line, and a kiss delivered by Aemon, who pressed it to Valyria's brow in the open court in front of everyone because he was not ashamed of his feelings or of the rule that demanded they be contained in public. Father came at the last possible minute, as he liked to do, to give the scene weight by withholding it first. Merion's hair was cropped short and threaded with 2 little shards of star metal that had been found in a crater along a northern spur. He had shaved completely. When he kissed Valyria's left cheek, he smelled of soap like vine bark and old blood washed out of stone. "Remember that they do not think of themselves as waiting," he murmured close to her ear, holding her arms at their conjugated half-length. "Not a hug, not a soldier's handshake. They think of themselves as observing. Let them keep thinking that." "I will," she said, "and do not let a priest set terms for a market," he added. "He will pretend it was you who wanted to speak of virtue." She swallowed a grin and failed. "Are there priests in Old Town?" "There are, if there are men," Merion said. "Though they pretend their god is one where we know there are many. I dislike simplicity. I find it breeds cruelty." "You dislike anything you cannot turn into a puzzle," Valyria said. He did not deny that. "If you are threatened by anything less than an army, kill the threat and be done with it," he continued, as casually as if he were reminding her to pack a plain robe for days when red would be inappropriate. "Do not waste time with mercy that has not been earned." She did not answer that. She did not tell him that the difference between a threat and a person had been a matter she could not always be brisk about. He knew that. He gave the command because the giving of it absolved him when she disobeyed it. "I will bring you a book from their library," she said instead. "Bring me their librarian," Aemon called past the casks, grinning like a villain in a cheap play that nevertheless made the audience love him. "Bring yourself home," Merion said with a soft emphasis that made the words matter more than they would have if they were loud. He stepped back and the gesture unfurled a space between them like silk. Erdas was at the edge of the terrace with a small group of clerks and scribes, holding his hands folded so that his fingers would not betray his nervousness by counting. He had set every paper in order 3 times, then left the room to walk twice around the courtyard to let his anxiety pour itself into the stones. He would part from this routine for the length of a voyage. When he saw Valyria lift her arm as if she were greeting him specifically, he bowed. It was small but not humble. She looked very young at that instant in that light, with the sea wind making a single strand of hair go wild at her temple and her eyelids lowered a fraction by the salt. Kalex was born downstairs carved wide and shallow enough for animals that had no patience for gentleness. He moved with an economy that did not belong to the main stage. He kept his wings tight and his head high, and when he passed over a patch of shadow cast by the upper terrace, he stretched his neck and bit it, because sometimes the world was a game to him. His harness bore trappings that could have ornamented a temple but did not look absurd on a being whose skin had the sheen of weaponry. When he stepped onto the deep platform of the family's greatest barge, the craft scarcely shifted. Men ran to ropes and women ran to chains, and a boy beat a drum with a measured hand to signal to the rowers that the rhythm would not meander today. The barge's prow had been shaped into a coiled beast that was not a dragon and not a serpent and not any creature anyone had seen. An intentional blur, an aesthetic choice to remind rivals that the family's taste did not have to be literal to be frightening. Valyria mounted the short ladder from the terrace to the barge and did not stumble. She did not look back because she believed that looking back made the spirit clumsy. The oars took their grip on the water. The barge moved. The harbor, from this angle, looked like a broken necklace. Piers were teeth and boats' tongues, and the small bays where fisherfolk did their business looked like cheeks carved beneath a mask. The sea beyond it had the morning's beaten metal quality, silver blue with veins of darker steel running like flaws through it. The sails of other families' ships stood like shrines against the low sky, and the watchtower lights whitened around their own flames now that day was properly upon them. A school of little fish-like coins fled the barge's shadow and startled a cormorant into an ungainly attempt at flight that it completed only because persistence is more powerful than grace. They cleared the outer breakwaters and found the horizon, and Valyria, even the skyline of it, even the highest of its towers and proudest masters of flame, became something behind them that could be held by fingers. Valyria stood at the front of the barge to make her mind remember that this was deliberate. Kalex stood beside her like a hill that floated, his tail withdrawn, his head turning now and again toward the city they were leaving as if displeased at the very concept of departure. He would always be displeased by the concept. A dragon was not made to accept distance. Distance seemed to him an ill-mannered joke played by small creatures. "You will be pampered," Valyria murmured, glancing at the rows of casks and the great sling of meat and the baskets of bone and gristle that would be his snacks. "And you will not take the oarsman's desire to watch you as anything other than their wish to go home with all their fingers." He swiveled one bright eye toward her again. She felt special under that look because she always had, and because being honest with oneself about one's vanity is as close to conquering it as most of us come. When the barge met the deep-water ship that would take them west, the transfer was accomplished with practiced splendor. A traveler could step from one to the other without feeling a step. The ship herself bore a name cut into the polished black stone of her stern in cuneiform that only plaster-crazy maesters in foreign schools found attractive. Valyria's own language had long since made letters into curves and air into script. Still, the old letters looked like little swords planted upright. She touched the name with 2 fingers. If the ship had been anything other than a ship, the gesture might have bound them. As it was, it merely comforted her. They cast off. The Dragon Gate's lanterns watched them go. The thin ribbon of smoke that was Kalex's breath draped itself across the prow like a scarf in wind. The sea looked wide enough to cleanse a person of everything but their nature. Valyria thought of the West. Old Town received its rumors before it received its guests. The watchmen on the green-lichened steps of the high tower had a list of signs that were to prompt immediate relay to their lord, and on days when the air was clear and the gulls diligent, they could perform their duty 4 or 5 times before their second drink. A ship of the freehold boded 3 different possibilities, and each of those could be multiplied by small inflections in the crew's posture and the tilt of the sail. Maldron Hightower knew these rules because he had written half of them into the current scroll of instructions himself. He was not yet 30 and already carried himself as if he had figured out his limits and made peace with them. His hair was pale but not white, his eyes a color that changed with the river, which made people who wanted to say something comfortably complimentary tell him his eyes were the color of wisdom. He sometimes bowed playfully when that happened, as if he had been complimented on his shoes. When the bell in the 6th gallery sounded the pattern that meant a foreign ship with important markers, he was in the solar with his sister's eldest child, listening to the wind in the chimney and pretending they could hear messages in it. The child wanted to hear dragons. Maldron wanted to hear nothing at all and was therefore alert to everything. He rose, kissed the child's forehead, and took the corridor that would carry him, with 2 turns at places where a man could lose his own heart if he wandered, to the lookouts at the top. The wind-up there did not feel the same as the wind at other heights. It had learned different lessons and trusted different rules. Maldron tasted salt and a faint sweetness as of something fermenting and decided that the tide would turn a little grudgingly today. The lookout put a finger to the brim of his cap and deferred the explanation Maldron had already formed for himself. "A big one," the man said. dressed like an altar. Valyrian, Maldron said, not with dread but with a suggestion of bracing that the lookout knew and appreciated. Some men hated the Eastern Empire in a simple way. It bored Maldron to hate anything simply. Any sign of soldiers beyond what a foreign lord would call a retinue? The lookout swallowed. She brought a dragon. Maldron closed his mouth around something like a smile, because the movement of gladness and terror in his ribs would have made anything more than that ridiculous. How many? He asked, tone gentle. 1, said the lookout. Then it is not a siege, Maldron said evenly, and clapped the man once on the shoulder like a brother. Run the linen flags. Tell them they will be met at the Traitors' Quay and escorted as an honor rather than as an arrest. And then, before any of that bears fruit, bring me Maester Eldrick. The bright royal pennons did their work, and soon a page came puffing up the stairs with his face very red and his chest looking as if a small bird wished to exit it. The Maester is in the rookery, my lord, he said to Maldron. He says you would not thank him if he came before his hands were free of. He used a rude word, lord. Guano, Maldron said cheerfully. We are at peace. I do not mind if my advisors occasionally smell of war. He descended again, his long strides eating the stairs. The high tower was his father's seat and his father was alive, but the habit of being the person who arrived first had formed early and never quite left him. He stepped into a corridor whose carved lintels depicted a scene somewhere between a memory and a threat. The old days, when the tower was lower and the gods strode more visibly through men's houses, and moved past it. He did not often stop to admire power. It seemed to him like praising the sea for being wet. He passed a window with leaded panes and a way a gust had learned and came into the inner court where the men with fair writing sat. You will stand in the long hall, he told them, and you will look as if everything you own is orderly. The Easterners love order. They have made it into an art. Do not let our roughness go to your heads. Let the roughness be a strategy. In the rookery, Maester Eldrick scolded a young woman for the shape of a bandage. You are a genius, he was saying with immense irritation. But genius that bruises a bird is not genius I find useful. He turned and saw Maldron, and adjusted the chain around his neck with a habitual tug that had no purpose. My lord, he said, the Easterners have come to buy our souls and our salt. One or the other? Maldron asked. Oh, both, Eldrick said, and blew a rebellious hair from his face, which put him in the undignified category for a moment and therefore restored his natural dignity in the next. He had a scholar's features that had learned how to laugh with affection at the vanity of scholarship, and he kept his hands very clean when he was not touching birds. It will be the woman, I suppose, he said, echoing rumors that had racing harnesses attached to them. A Targaryen. Do you know her name? Maldron said. I know what the wind calls her, Eldrick returned. Somebody in the Citadel will say they know more. They will be lying or, worse, be right. Maldron smiled and shook his head, not because Eldrick was wrong, but because Eldrick enjoyed being right so much. You will attend, he said, and you will translate their highest tongue if they wish to be flattered. If they speak to us in tradesman's Valyrian, we will answer in honest tongues. I love it when you decide who we will be beforehand, Eldrick complained affectionately. Someone must, Maldron said, and the way his mouth softened framed his next thought. His father had once said precisely this to him and had not been joking. At the Traitors' Quay, the burly men who wore bright sashes to show they had permission to collect fees saw a ship that would require neither money nor permission. They arranged their faces accordingly. The ship came in not arrogantly, not timidly, but as if the sea had decided it was tired of asking the vessel to go elsewhere. The oars lifted one after another, smooth as a line of dancers. When the prow cut the river's skin, the river grunted but refrained from showing temper. The dragon stood, rising into view slowly, like a statue on a platform that ascended by gears. It made no roar and breathed no fire. It stood and looked, and the city shivered in lines that had nothing to do with wind. Gods, someone whispered in the crowd, and someone else elbowed him for profanity, and someone else shut his eyes as if prayer had to be navigated by darkness. Valyria saw first a tower, Of course she did. She was of a city that measured itself by the elegance of its spikes. The high tower did not resemble a Valyrian structure. It resembled defiance. Its faces were heavy with ornament, and its buttresses carried stories down them like downpipes carry water. It rose not sleekly but insistently, like a man standing up again after being told to sit down. Less beautiful, perhaps, than the towers of home, but more stubborn. She admired stubbornness even when it was the cause of her most elaborate labors. She had bathed the salt off her hair and bound it close, dressed in travel red with a mantle of silk that did not shout. The men with her were arranged in pleasing ranks, and their weapons were the sorts used for ceremony until ceremony failed. She did not intend ceremony to fail. Kalex had eaten meat and been watered, and had endured both indignities with the special rudeness that only dragons and princes can muster. She stood with her hip a little forward and her hand resting lightly on the balustrade, a posture her mother had taught her as an antidote to a world that cared to ogle. She saw, second, a face among faces, a man whose bearing said, "This is my city and I love it eno. Ugh, to be bored by it." His hair was fair without their pallor. He wore a sword as one wears a habit. He did not touch it like someone who had slept with it under his head. She marked him for a person who would speak with courtesy and use it as a shield and a bridge. Maester Eldrick stood beside him with a chain that was longer than fashion demanded, and a look that said he had eaten skepticism for breakfast and found it nutritious. The others looked as she had expected. Proud men who did not know whether to show fear, proud women who did not intend to let anyone notice that they would be the ones to show fear if fear had to be demonstrated. There were children on shoulders. There were old women with missing teeth who watched as if dragons in their youth had been more impressive. The gangplank hit limestone with a frank noise. Valyria crossed it with a small retinue, her steps spelled against accident. Kalex stayed on the ship and lowered his head to the quay with a theatrical sigh, as if to suggest that a city built of stone must be very depressed to be built of stone. Men would tell their children later that the dragon's breath smelled like cinnamon, or like blood, or like hot coins. The truth was that it smelled like heat and patience. "Lord Hightower," Valyria said with a precise inclination that was neither too deep nor too slight, "I bring you greetings in the names I was given and the names I have earned." "Lady," Maldron said, and did not use her family title first because he wanted to see whether that would prick or relieve. "I bid you welcome to Old Town in the names of my Lord Father, who is not here to say it to you himself because he has misplaced his ankles and says he would not wish a dragon to see him sitting down." She liked him immediately. "I am Valyria," she said, and let the Targaryen follow quietly, like a servant who knows when to hang back. "This is Kalex. He will not eat anyone you love unless they are unkind." "Then we shall behave," Maldron said. The crowd laughed, not because the line was so witty but because laughing created an illusion of control. He gestured to his companion. "Maester Eldrick, who has promised me that his Valyrian will not get us killed, and the Septon Marin, whose god has sent him to say that he has one name and one face, which must be a terrible burden for the god." Valyria bowed to each in turn and kept the glimmer of a smile away from the corners of her mouth. She noticed a woman just behind and to the side, dressed in Hightower colors but in a cut that suggested she had chosen it rather than worn what was assigned. With dark hair and a mouth that understood jokes she did not intend anyone else to catch. The woman met Valyria's glance for only a moment and then looked away, an honesty Valyria marked. "We will receive you in the long hall," Maldron continued. "Unless you would prefer to be received in the open where your companion can see you at every moment. I confess we do not have a stall fitted out for him. He does not love roofs," Valyria admitted. "But he understands that hospitality must sometimes trust the sky to behave. If we can leave the doors open and agree to call the arrangement an archway. We are good at calling things 3 different names and then arguing about which is the truer," Eldrick murmured to her in careful Valyrian. "Consider yourself at home." "I will consider myself," Valyria answered in the same tongue, just to make the muscles of the language visible in the air. "And then, perhaps, consider your city as well." They walked beneath banners that told the story of the river's courtship with the sea. The hall smelled of beeswax and papers that had not been touched in 3 weeks. Valyria's eyes appraised the carving that ran along the great beams under the ceiling. No dragons here, but ships with curving sides like smiles and fish with faces that looked serious as judges. She liked the audacity of a fish that would look at humans as if it were thinking of taxing them. On the dais, Lord Athelard Hightower sat with his ankle crossed over his knee and a cane propped beside him like a friend who was told to wait. He had lost weight but had not lost his sense that things ought to be told to him gently and told to others firmly. When he rose to bow, he leaned on the cane and made a face that was not a grimace but a polite request of his bones. Valyria bowed precisely the way she would have to a man who could still dance. She held his gaze with perfect respect, not the sort of pity that would make a proud man spit. "You bring a guest whose reputation is larger than our hall," Athelard said, when the first exchange of speeches had been made, when the trays of fruit and sliced cheese and little almond cakes had appeared and the small, strategic silence had laid down a carpet before every big word. "Kalex," Valyria said. "He is, in his own estimation, the more important of us." Athelard smiled with real affection at the impertinence of that. "And yet we will speak with you and not with him. For now," Valyria said lightly, and Maldron's mouth twitched in a way that made Eldrick feel a quiet hope. It was not yet time for proposals. These things walked slowly, the way men in armor walk through crowded rooms. Septon Meryn cleared his throat and asked the question that had to be asked for the sake of those whose comfort lives inside predictable rituals. "Do you bow to gods?" he said, phrased in a way a better man would have made sound simpler. "We incline," Valyria said. "We have found that bowing can lead to bending and bending can lead to breaking. Where I come from, we ask our gods to be practical and our practicalities to be divine." "Ah," Meryn said, in the tone of a man who has been thrown a loaf of bread when he expected a fish. He was not a fool. He had dreamed not long ago of a light that did not cast shadows. If he had confided that he had woken with tears in his eyes and no explanation for them, he would have delivered his confession to a god who counseled him to wash his face and go about his day. Valyria made the lightest motion with her fingers in the air, and a servant stepped forward, placed a small chest, delicately carved, on the table that had been brought out for courtesy's gifts. "A taste of what we give allies," she said. Inside the chest lay a collar of hammered silver and a veil of thin steel beads that had been polished to mirror. Nestled beside it was a little black egg the size of a child's head, which was only glass and could be made to glow faintly when whispered to. The beads would make the wearer's breath sound like a small bell when the wind moved just so. And if one turned one's head, the veil would moor into patterns that made viewers feel they had discovered a secret. "For your lady wife," Valyria said to Athelard, as if she had not heard that Lady Hightower had preferred a quiet life of psalms to the performance that sometimes came with high seats. "Or for the Hightower's lady, however you prefer the titles to be worn." "Worn is right," Maldron murmured, so low only Eldrick heard. "We should allocate courtesy with the same care we allocate water," Eldrick murmured back. "Else we drown." The first night in Old Town was spent in rooms that had been aired and swept and dressed with new rushes. Valyria's chamber had a window that looked upon the river where it ceased to be certain of itself. Lamps smoked in the city. Music learned to express itself in a different grammar than she was used to. Strings drawn by bows instead of fingers. Drums that desired to be hidden under the skins of larger animals. Kalex bedded down on the broad field between the outer wall and the river. No one wanted to explain to the dragon why he could not, and the archers on the wall found their eyes peeled of sleep. No sentinel fell from his post. The mere thought would have made them ashamed. And yet the night had its mercy. Kalex slept more deeply on foreign ground than he had on decks. Dragons do not fear anything. They disdain what they cannot eat and ignore what does not interest them. But even disdain requires strength, and strength must be given rest like money must be given a purse to live in. Valyria wrote, as she had promised. She sat with an ugly cup of olive green glaze that reminded her of the canal quarter and a pen that made a soft scratching like a mouse behind a panel. And she put down a hand's worth of lines to Emian and 3 sentences to Erdas that contained instructions and a joke about fish that could not be translated without dying, and 1 paragraph to her mother that had been written long ago and would be written again until they were both different. When she finished, she sealed everything with wax the color of the last light on the sea and gave it to the courier, who had a face like a cliff that had accepted its shape. She slept not long but efficiently, like a good meal eaten standing in a kitchen. In the morning she walked with Maldron along the river, as if they were cousins who had always been fond of each other but had never really known how to say it. Behind them their attendants talked and pretended not to listen. Maester Eldrick was engaged in an argument about the best way to propagate a certain species of fig that would have sounded to someone who did not love figs like an argument about whether it is better to kiss or be kissed. The sky had no subtlety. It told them exactly how much blue it had decided to be. "You are younger than I expected," Maldron said, without looking at her, which made it less an assessment and more the acknowledging of a debt to honesty. "I am older than I feel," Valyria said, "and exactly as old as my father thinks me." He laughed, not loudly, and stones near their feet went on being stones. "My father believes I am an old man who has learned how to borrow a younger man's knees." "Your father believes you will not break what he built," Valyria said. "He would not laugh if I said so." "He would not," Maldron agreed, and turned his face toward a sail that had just caught a shape of wind that made it seem as if it were a breath-taking breath. "So, trade." "So," she said, "also an understanding." "Which is not the same thing," Maldron said. "It is a cousin of it," Valyria returned. "Your city is a bottle into which many things are poured. We have bottles of our own. It is useful to know which pores serve both. If your pour burns through the bottle," he said, mild as a priest talking to a child, "we will say no. If your bottle insults the wine," she said, easy, "we will go elsewhere." They were quiet after that in a way that let the words go live elsewhere for a while. The river was doing the day's work at its mouth, and a pair of boys were pretending their two narrow craft were warships and were colliding with as much force as small bodies could muster. Kalex's head turned, almost lazily, to follow their play. One of the boys saw the gesture and waved. The dragon's eyelid moved. The boy looked as if he would burst from the privilege and then, heroically, did not. In Valyria, the mornings broke like a rumor of a god climbing out of a cave. Erdas stood with his mirror on the table, the little one with a size to it that invited faces to lower toward it. He did not believe the glass candles had voices. He believed it would be dangerous for him to believe that, but he liked the mirror. He looked into it now just to find his own eyes and remind himself they had become brown, not black with age. The morning's work would be simple, if any given morning ever could be. He would fold Valyria's 3 drafts into 5, and he would compose a letter for a certain house that had always believed it deserved a different language than the one it had been given at birth. He paused in the act of nipping the quill. A tremor came then, small like the shiver that runs through a human body after the passing of a sensation. And the water in his wash basin showed a ripple that did not belong to his own movement. The 14 flames were rumbling, not in the way they always rumble, in the way they do when something down there has opened a new way of talking to itself. People said earthquake the way children say rain without understanding what is speaking to what. He did not move his feet to find the doorway. He did not go to any god. He stood and let his pulse find the beat the rumble made. And when the beat ran out, he sat and went back to his work, because once, long ago, he had learned that panic is the easiest thing to sell and the most expensive thing to buy. Later, when Emion came to the antechamber with his robe worn crooked and his hair looking like a promise he hadn't kept to it, he leaned on Erdas's table with his hands and grinned as if he had not slept. "You are carrying too much love in your mouth," Erdas said by way of greeting. "It spills from me," Emion said cheerily. "Do you think I can keep it?" She wrote. She writes like she walks, choosing the ground first. "I am reading men who only choose ground after they have planted their flags," Erdas responded. "If Our Lady is welcomed with courtesy, it will be because she made a man believe he invented it." Emion laughed in the way that made even those who disliked him want to see him again. "Do you think she will burn anyone?" he asked, only half joking. "Burn? No," Erdas said. "Char and singe and make someone believe his feet are warming toward it? Yes. She is better than we deserve," Emion murmured, almost to himself. "Do not be ridiculous," Erdas said, Everyone deserves what they know to want. And what do you know to want, old friend? Emion asked abruptly, catching him in a net he had not seen thrown. Erdas thought and did not answer in the first moment, which was honesty disguised as caution. To be present at the choosing of names when a child is born, he said. To be able to teach a person to make their letters neat enough to hold their thoughts. To be permitted to sit in the back of a room where people who think they are important say rather ordinary things and make them sound like history. And perhaps to go to the sea and look at it for a while when all of that is done. Emion's smile slid to the side, softer and more private. I can give you the last, he said. I cannot give you the first unless I steal a child, and I think that is frowned upon. It is, even here, Erdas said dryly. The days in Old Town turned themselves like pages. Valyria learned the streets the way a cat learns the roofs. She did not travel alone. She did not feel the need. Men and women spoke to her, and she answered in simple words that they could tell were not her simplest, and they liked her for that because they perceived she was keeping a weapon she could have unsheathed. She stood on the quay with her hands folded into her sleeves and listened to an old woman tell her that she did not like dragons because they made her dream of floods. She asked the right questions and did not smile when it would have won her affection cheaply. She carried herself like someone who had learned too early to hold fire without appearing to fear it. Maldron watched her the way a patient hunter watches the shape of a deer's thought in the air near an alder. He found that he liked her more the more he resisted liking her. He found that her courtesy did not feel like a cage. He found that his city did not hold its breath when she went through it, which meant people had decided to live even if the fire grew hotter. He told himself this was because she had been careful, which was true, and not because he yearned for an unusual possibility. He told himself that he had wanted the freehold to treat his city as something more than a domed jar collected on a traveling table for as long as he had grown old enough to be ambitious. Then he told himself not to be a younger son and grinned and felt older. Maester Eldrick argued 3 men and 1 woman into bed at dawn twice because their brains were tired of pretending they were armies. He allowed himself to admit to the rookery that he had enjoyed himself. He wrote 2 letters to colleagues in the Citadel that were both love letters and battle letters and told himself that he had done something. He watched the dragon with the same quiet curiosity he had always afforded to catastrophic beauty. He dreamed, one night, of a candle that did not burn and woke with his hands hot. Septon Marin preached 2 sermons, and in neither did he mention dragons or foreigners. He spoke instead about bread, and taught his congregation how to think of grain as an act of mercy that even a god ate eagerly. He washed his hands longer before supper and dreamed of a god with many hands, not to blaspheme, but because his parishioners had many needs and the God's men make always inherit our limits. He met Valyria once on the steps and said only, "We must both persuade men to love what profits them." And she said, "Yes." And they parted as if they had both been wise enough to admit kinship. On the 4th day, the glass candle in Eldrick's study lit by itself. This is to say, he did not light it. He did not believe in it. Someone else, somewhere far away in a room where not even the spiders bothered to weave because they had found better habitats, breathed, or thought the right set of syllables, or did nothing at all, and the candle answered a question the way heat answers a hand placed too near it. Eldrick put his hands on the table and did not move them. The flame was not a flame. It was a suggestion of light, a blade that did not cut. It made the hair on his arms want to stand. It hummed the way a swarm hums. He told himself a story about tricks, about substances that catch invisible airs and are not truly supernatural. He told himself the story of how his chain had been earned by years of reading and how he could not toss those years away because a piece of rock chose to masquerade. He did not whisper to it. He did not dare. It whispered to him. It did not speak with words. It gave him heat the way a mouth gives breath to a cold hand. And he saw, not with his eyes, not with anything a man can name in bare language, a woman standing on a balcony of black stone with a horizon filled by mountains that made light learn new behaviors. She was of an age with a city. She was not a person he knew. And then he saw, quicker than a pulse, a seam of light in darkness that looked like a cut made into the air by a rational knife. He smelt the smell of odd thunder. He stood and went to the window and looked at a harbor that did not care about his private excitements whatsoever. He did not tell Maldron that night. He did not tell anybody. He told the bird in his hands, while binding a small wound with a care that would have made a man embarrassed to receive it, that sometimes the mind acts like a lens. The bird looked at him with the contempt birds have for our justifications, and then tucked its head under its wing. He took that as counsel to sleep. On the 5th morning, they spoke terms in the long hall, and the words were like men who had been instructed to fight but were reluctant because they had family in common. Valyria proposed a road. Maldron proposed tariffs that would keep her road from being a spear thrust through his city's flank. Valyria offered to leave engineers behind to tend to drains and to fire breaks, and Maldron suggested that perhaps the engineers would like to have nieces and nephews in Old Town, so they might be persuaded to stay permanently and remember their loyalties. They bantered without hurting. They sharpened without cutting. Somewhere a waiter carrying tea looked out the window and a gull made a joke only gulls find amusing. And it was there, in the middle of a sentence, with Valyria saying, "We prefer roads that do not wash away," and Maldron's mouth opening to answer that roads often wash away because they wish to return to the river's family, that the sound came, and ever since there are those in Old Town who wake to it in their marrow when the weather turns and the river talks in its sleep. It was not the sound of a collapse. They knew that noise. Buildings make a certain confession when they yield. It was a brief, deep tone like a bell struck underwater. It was as if a giant finger had flicked the air. The long hall's banners rose up a fraction and settled. The lamps swung not once but twice. Dust released itself from the beam's carvings in a soft rain. Maldron's hand went out without his consent toward Valyria as if to steady a guest, and her hand reached toward his as if to allow it. Neither of them quite touched the other. Eldrick looked at the glass candle he was not within reach of and found that he was thinking about it extremely loudly. Then there was silence. A very wide silence. Merrin made the sign he made in gossip to make people believe he was making it to a god. Valyria drew a breath that did not want to come fully into her chest. Maldron said, tone dry and edged, "We do not often host tremors here. We prefer our earth to keep its private life." "Then your earth has made a friend," Valyria said. In the harbor, Kalex lifted his head and made a sound that was the first true dragon voice many in Old Town had heard. It was a low note, not aggressive like the beginning of a song. The river answered without meaning to. For a moment the tide refused to choose a direction. Two boys in a narrow craft shouted accusations at each other that both believed and neither meant. Passed. The noise did not come again. Men who had been standing with weight on their toes flattened their feet and discovered that the floor would hold them. The banners decided to pretend they had not moved. Everyone laughed at something they could not name. And then, because laughter makes men think they have regained their sovereignty, they returned to terms and to edges and to negotiated inconveniences, and pretended that the earth did not sometimes put a finger to its lip and say, "Shoo." Valyria excused herself earlier than she otherwise would have and went to the river's edge. Not so close that a stone thrown by a drunk could reach her. Not so far that Kalex would believe she was abandoning him to the mercy of people who smelled of fish and iron. She stood and looked east, and her face changed in a way that Maldron noticed without deciding to watch her do it. A hawker barefoot on the quay saw her and saw the change and told her wife later that some women carry a weather in their faces. "There was a sound," she said when Maldron approached, as if the observation were news because truth wanted to be polite. "Like a door shutting very far away." "We will send men to look at doors," Maldron said. "I will send dreams," Valyria said, absently, and his eyelids flickered in a way that told her something she would never use against him. He was not a man to be awed often by things he could not name. He had been awed at least twice since she arrived. "Do your candles always answer?" he asked, too mild, which made the question an intimacy. "Mine is often stubborn," she said. "It sounds like you," he replied. She turned her head then, gently, and the corner of her mouth warmed. "It does," she said. That night she slept poorly. The sheets in the Old Town chamber were good linen and smelled of rain rather than of sun, and the feather mattress shaped itself under her shoulder as if it were an obedient dog. She dreamed in scraps. of a cloud of ash that did not move like ash but like thought, of a man with a broken chain laughing, of a knife that was not metal and not stone but something that made both of those jealous. She woke to the impression of someone standing at the foot of her bed and sat up without allowing fear to take her, and found she was alone. The candle in the corner had not snuffed, and the little pool of melted wax had taken the shape of a map she could not quite recollect. In Valyria, Master Erdas woke with his heart beating as if it had been galloping uphill for an hour. He had fallen asleep over the table, he discovered, like a clerk in a play about the futility of work. He wiped his face and blinked at an ink blot he had made on a line that had deserved better. He stood and immediately had to sit again because the room was not, for a moment, trustworthy. He put his hands flat on the wood and said aloud to the empty room, "We will be rational. We will be devout in the way a craftsman is devout, to skill, to attention." The second tremor came in the late afternoon when the heat made the air between buildings appear to thicken like honey. It did not feel like the first. It did not push and then retreat. It rolled, long and playful and slightly cruel, the way a large animal rolls its weight along the length of its prey before deciding where to bite. Dust came down in houses where no one had reason to keep a broom. Men who had flattered themselves that the first was a thing to shrug at did not shrug now. Kalex lifted his wings and then lowered them again and made a clicking with his teeth. In the high tower, Lord Athelard's cane fell from where he had rested it and hit the floor with a crack that went up his spine as a pain and down the hallway as a practical noise. In Valyria, a tower that had been built for beauty and then never loved enough to be useful developed a crack so fine that a hair got caught in it and never escaped. Emian found Erdas after the second and looked for one heartbeat as if he were about to be the man he pretended and make a joke. He did not. "You are old," he said instead, which was not graceful and very affectionate. "I am," Erdas said. "Tell me not to be foolish," Emian said. "Do not be foolish," Erdas said at once, "because men deserve promptness in such matters." "I will anyway," Emian said. "The sea does not ask permission. I will ride the long waves before they decide to buck." "I thought you preferred dice to waves," Erdas said. Emian's smile sharpened. "They are cousins," he said. "One delights in hands, the other rewards spine. She is out there. Do you think I can sit?" "I think you can do anything," Erdas said. "That is my habit with you." "You are a loyal liar," Emian said, and kissed his brow as if he were the elder brother and not the boy from the olive press. That night, above the long hall's rafters, a rook with a broken feather beat itself into exhaustion until Eldrick climbed, muttering, and took it with both hands and held it until it remembered that life was not that singular. He breathed into its feathers. The glass candle had not lit again. He thought of what he would say if anyone asked him, which no one would because most men prefer to think their timelines and their temperaments rule the universe. He told himself to keep his chain collected around his collarbone and not let it spread like ivy down his chest. He lay down in a room that was colder than he liked and watched a tiny square of sky and thought, if their city should shake in a manner that makes stone misbehave, we will be working for years to put words to it. At dawn of the 6th day, thick fog descended upon the river and married the sea as if they had been kept apart by an unkind guardian. It constrained sound and then magnified it. Valyria stood at the balcony with her mantle over her shoulders and watched the fog behave like a living person invited to a party. Maldron appeared beside her. Men who are at home in their houses can appear where they like, and said nothing for a time. Civility sometimes asks silence for its most eloquent contributions. "If I told you that I have dreamed twice of my home standing on one leg," Valyria said at last, "and that the leg is tired, what would you say?" "I would say that those who love tall things always have their share of dreams about falling," Maldron said. "And then I would say that we are not keeping you for pleasure. If you believe, you must go." "I have not earned what I came for," she said, immediately, fiercely, as if she were insulted by her own fear. "I will not go with empty hands." "Sometimes a quick visit and a faithful return are the entire plan," Maldron said, not to dissuade her but to make the possibility share breath with her. She turned to him and the fog laid a damp brush on her cheek. "Do you wish me to go?" she asked. It was neither a flirtation nor a trap. It was a naked question. "No," he said. He did not do her the discourtesy of hesitating. "And also, yes, I am a man who enjoys a tense posture, lady. Keeps me alert. But tension that is about to break." He lifted one hand, made a small twisting motion in air. "Becomes a foolishness. I do not bend," she said. "I have been taught not to. I am more likely to cut and apologize than to bow and regret." "Then cut," he said, "and do not apologize." The fog thinned as if their conversation had been the signal it had been waiting for. Beyond the river, on the long field, Kalex's head rose and turned toward them, and the thin plume of his breath blew straight east. When her letter came at last to Emion, it had been soaked in river water and dried in a hurry and carried by a boy who did not like horses and loved them. Emion read it under a slanted eave and said 5 words that made a woman in the next courtyard blush without knowing why. He went to his father and spoke quickly and did not say, "Let me go." He said, "I am going," and his father said, "You are not yet your own wind." And Emion said, "Yes, but I can borrow what I need." Maron's eyes went flat as old coins. "If your sister returns and you are not here to greet her, I will eat your dice," he said. "If my sister does not return, I will have no use for dice," Emion said. They stared like men who had both taught the other how to stare and were now offended to see the skill mirrored. In the end it as Delessa who settled it. She appeared at the chamber's threshold with her hair unbound and a robe that had been tailored not for a queen but for a woman whose skin hurt. "Take the second harness," she said, and Emion bowed to his mother not as a prince bows to power but as a boy bows to weather. They left in a hush that would have sounded like an insult if it had not been an answer. Themis did not love water and said so at intervals in an extended paragraph of clicks and low vowels. Emion did not care. The sea behaved like a cat who dislikes a new guest but permits it to sit with certain rules. The sky opened and closed its hands. Erdas stood on a terrace and watched the speck of him become smaller and told himself he had not been unwise to encourage the young in their unwise errands. If the earth is going to put its finger on its lip and ask for quiet, he thought, who am I to pretend I can talk over it? Old Town woke with a headache that day. Several men swore that the fog had gotten in under their skin. Valyria packed methodically with the sort of attention that pretends not to be frustrated and fooled no one. Maldron brought her a token, a little disc of river iron that had been forged thin and then hammered with the simple emblem of a tower and a wave making a bargain. He did not say anything about it because sometimes a token is either a kiss or a bribe depending upon what one says while offering it. She took it and closed her fist upon it and did not promise to wear it. The day agreed to be hot. The river decided to be green. They said their formal goodbyes in the long hall. Lord Athelard rose with a competence that had surprised his household and gave her words that had been written on a parchment 3 centuries ago, and that he had decided to use because old words sometimes acquire new powers when spoken by men who do not pretend them to be theirs. She replied with a promise that had no obligations tucked under it to bite the ankle later. Septon Marin blessed her with an economy that made him feel virtuous. Eldrick held her gaze for a heartbeat longer than courtesy required and bowed until his chain made a noise he would have scolded a colleague for. Maldron took her hand and kissed the air above her fingers because it seemed to him right to want and wrong to taste. At the quay, the crowd had gathered in a compact curve like a cupped hand. People who had no business there had made business there by sheer force of wanting. The dragon stood and the ship was ready, and the men who would guard her across the sea were thinking simultaneously of home and of stories they would tell about foreign faces. Valyria stood a moment longer than necessary and looked at the tower because she had learned that looking at something before leaving it is a way of paying it. The high tower looked back as towers do, without blinking. If there had been omens, they were of the ordinary sort. A gull that did not seem to know how to end a circle. A fish sculling too near the surface. A child pointing in the wrong direction. The ship pulled away from the quay with an ease that made those who understood such matters privately proud of their practice. The river grudgingly allowed itself to participate in this departure. The sea pretended this had been its idea all along. Valyria looked west for only as long as it took to honor the silhouettes she was about to consign to memory. Then she turned east, and her face changed back into the face of a woman who commands a being that most men do not know how to watch without forgetting how to blink. The wind favored them with a hand on the back rather than a slap. The water narrowed down into the throat of the strait, and their oars cut it into opinions. The dragon slept as something that has never had to fear sleeps, with one eye open for form's sake. When the first unusual cloud appeared, it did not announce itself. It gathered like a bruise. It learned from some inaccessible school how to spread without becoming thinner. The sailors on the night watch remarked to one another that the dawn would be sickly. A man who had lost 2 brothers to a winter sickness 3 years ago said nothing because he had learned that on some days one must ask silence to share the bench. The cloud grew, and then it ripened, and then it lay down upon the horizon, so that even those who did not have the language for it could tell. This was a thing not common. Kalex woke and made a sound that was not the same sound he had made in the long hall when the banners lifted. It was higher, and in it there was a tone of inquiry. Valyria stood, and her fingers turned the little iron disc Maldron had given her. The sea seemed to inhale and then keep its lungs full. In Valyria, men ran. It had been a long time since men ran in public in the family quarters. Even in their feasts there had been an air that made a person's feet think twice about the efficiency of haste. But the earth had set up a song now, and it was not one of their songs, and the city that was used to instructing elements discovered that the elements were conducting. The air tasted like metal and like bitterness. The 14 flames did not speak each with its own voice anymore. They had a choir, and it had found a note. Erdas held to a doorframe with his left hand and a sheaf of papers with his right, because some habits and loves do not abandon a man when the building asks him to. He was not afraid for his own bones. He had outlived fear by accident more than once. He was afraid for certain roofs and a particular garden, and the boy bent over a bucket in the corridor who had not had time to stand up. He said, in his mind and to no one, "We are proud." He said, "We will pay for it in the coin we kept for ourselves." He said, "She is on the water. Let the water be kind." The cloud stretched, not upward, not outward, but into a shape that falsely promised to be only a cloud. A line of men on a ship cried out as one man, and then 2 lines, because the second line had been waiting for the first. Valyria closed her hand around the iron disc and thought, very clearly and with a sudden outrageous attention, of course. Not here. Not now. Not like this. Kalex held his head high and made a question sound, and Valyria leapt to the harness and answered him by throwing her weight forward and showing him the shape of flight. He launched without needing to think about it. The ship dropped away beneath them. The world chose an adjective, and the adjective was bright. A light, not of fire, not of storm, forced itself upon everything that had thought it had eyes. Maldron, at the top of the tower, saw the eastern horizon become a cliff under which the sea decided to leap. He had never bitten his tongue before. He bit it now to keep from saying a name, as if saying it to the air would be a prayer. Eldrick fell to his knees not because he worshipped, but because the nervous system prefers knees when it cannot decide what else to do with the rest of the body. Septon Marin cried out something that, if transcribed, would look like blasphemy and would, if sung, feel like praise. The light came, and it made shadow a new color. The air bellowed. The sea, in a vast region between lands, rose up as if something enormous had stomped it with contempt. The wave did not yet exist where Valyria's ship was. Physics has a tedious honesty. She and Kalex hung for a moment above the deck, her hair breaking its own agreement with her pins, and then the shift in the ship's pitch told a story to her bones. She did not wait for the wave. She rode it. What if the old empire had not fallen? A scholar will ask later, when the details are better arranged and the pain has had a chance to buy itself a softer chair. What would we be then? Eldrick, if he is still alive, will say, we would be precisely what we are, but we would have a different weather. He will not add that empires fall even when they do not fall. The ground moves beneath them, and the light changes its mind, and men who thought themselves immune to novelty find that their sons and daughters have learned foreign grammar. He will write it somewhere later, in a draft that he will never publish. In the air above the sharpened line between smooth water and water that intended to become structure, Valyria pressed her face to Kalex's neck and shouted where only a dragon would hear. He curved his body, understanding comfort as a byproduct of physics. The ship below slammed its bow into a rising plane and shattered some of its carved attention to detail. Men clung, shouted, prayed, swore, chose one over the other, and then felt childish about it. The wave rose and did not bother to look at them. When the wave reached Old Town, it had decided to be older than stone. It sent itself up the river with a laugh that made barges moan and the high tower tighten its muscles. Maldron did what men of his training do. He ordered people to do things they had been told in drills to do, and he put his levered energy into opening the lowest gates to let the first waters pass, and he shouted up to bells to ring in the pattern that meant not enemy, not fire, but something you have never rehearsed for and therefore must imagine. He saw a boat flip like a coin and then right itself because a boy on board was just that stubborn. He saw the dragon in the sky, the line of it cut with light against fog and cloud, and thought, not with jealousy but with a soldier's fury, that all our cleverness is nothing when the world decides to be large. It was not the last wave. It was the first of several, and the second was kinder in the way a second blow sometimes is, because having learned where the soft parts are, it spends less energy. The third was petty and tried to undo the good the second had left. The fourth seemed to come from a different maker. It threw strange debris into the harbor that men stared at with blank unwillingness to admit that they had never seen such material before. Pieces of glass that were not glass except in the way they glittered. Fragments of stone that were warm and stayed warm even after an hour of cold river. A carcass of a thing that had never had business swimming. Much later, sailors in distant inns will tell lies about that carcass. They will make its eyes civilized and insisting. They will give it a mouth that resembles judgment. The truth was that it was nothing more or less than a large fish stunned by an idiot god. But they will keep its story because it forever after makes them feel that they were there when the world confessed a new kind of secret. Eastward, beyond the reach of Old Town's gossip but not beyond the reach of its understanding, the freehold gathered its attention. Towers leaned on buttresses and told them to be gentlemen. Streets that had thought themselves safe under the protection of men with titles discovered that molten stone regards titles as politely as it regards cats. Whole neighborhoods became maps of previous stability. But not all fell, and not all failed, and not everything that burned did so in order to injure. Fire, too, can be precision. The new vents opened like mouths and then sighed like exhaustion. The people of the city made lines not of class but of function and passed buckets and words and pieces of family. The dragons screamed. They screamed not with fear but with outrage against a change that had not asked their permission. And some flew. Eemion on Themis rode the boundary between an ugly sky and an uglier sea and found himself laughing wildly at something that had no humor in it. He saw a crest of water trying to become architecture and cut it with his dragon's mass. He learned in one moment a new respect for physics, and in the next a new respect for awe. He turned Themis toward where he imagined his sister to be, as if by pointing his heart he could point his path. Valyria rode the shoulder of chaos. Kalex knew the shape of waves in his bones, the way a hawk knows the shape of air. They climbed when climbing meant safety and dove when diving meant moving through a thing instead of being struck in the face by it. Below, the ship that had been entrusted for this embassy executed all the decisions men can make when the world decides to be indiscreet. They cut ropes that had been tied with love. They dropped cargo that had taken months of negotiation to load. They sang the filthy songs of their youth because the body knows when it will die and wants to confess in the language it first learned. The wave rolled under them. It lifted the ship like a mother who loves too much and then set it down again like a father who is teaching a son to be not spoiled. Valyria shouted for certain men to hold to certain things and they held, and some did not and disappeared, and she could not think about their names. She thought only over and over, not as prayer but as duty, hold, and Kalex held. Old Town spat the last of the water back into the sea and learned a new set of smells. Fires in river wet that sulked and made smoke. Oils that had never intended to float near fish. The sourness of men who had lost their dignity and found it again too quickly. Maldron stood with his hands on the parapet and, when he knew he would not be seen by anyone who would write about it later, put them over his face. Eldrick took inventory of injuries like a banker and sent 4 boys running and blamed himself for not being able to run as well as they could. Meryn pulled 3 children out from under a pushed-apart pile of barrels and told a god he sometimes doubted that he would doubt less on days when his hands did not shake. The water went back to deciding to be a river. The dragon in the sky circled once, then twice, then dropped to a height that made men's bellies tense. And then, with a control that made even those who hated such beasts grateful, it landed on the long field like a storm deciding to be a hill. Valyria slid from the harness with her hair wild and her mouth curved in a line that made Maldron feel he had discovered a new grammar. She did not speak. He did not either. They looked east. They waited. Men are not good at waiting. Dragons are worse. But there was nothing to be done to speed what was coming. They waited. A day passed. A second. A third that carried the stench of stranger fires. Refugees from smaller places along the shore began to appear, stunned by the size of their unlucky awe. They spoke words that did not always make sense and carried children in ways that made Maldron's stomach hurt to look at. Valyria gave orders to her household that were absorbed like water into linen. The freehold ship did not return. Another did, one of the lesser houses, scarred and carrying a story that was all misinterpretation because the men on it had been facing west when the wave came, and had learned, instead of science, a fresh vocabulary for terror. On the afternoon of the 4th day, when the light learns to pretend to be gold in a city with old limestone, a shape serrated the horizon, and another, and then the sound came, not the wave's idiot boom but a different thing, clever and insolent. Dragons. Kalek stood in a movement of air that was not wind and answered. His sound made men step back from joys they had not realized they had been about to express. The shapes grew. The sky bore them without knowing what it was suffering. Emion came first on Temis like a promise that had decided to be proof. He did not land until he had shown his sister with the line of his body that he had all his pieces and that he still refused to bow to roofs. When he did, it was with a skidding ease that made his dragon look younger than it was. He was grinning like a sinner who has found out sin was an illusion. He pulled off his gloves and fashioned his hair with both hands and then, only then, looked for his sister. "Did you bring me a sound?" he asked when he had breath. "I brought you too much," she said, and threw her arms around him with such force that he swore affectionately and pretended to be injured. He sobered in a blink, the way only men who have trained cheerfulness to be a mantle can sober. "It is not the end," he said, as if he had to tell her. "Do not let anyone's face tell you that it is." He looked past her shoulder at the high tower and at Maldron, and nodded once in recognition that would be mistaken for rudeness by men with wounded pride. "What is it then?" Maldron asked frankly. "A beginning that has a grudge against every plan you made," Emion said. "Part of the city is singing. The rest is learning the chorus. We hold. We who can fly help those who cannot. We who can be cold carry water for those who cannot stop being fire." "Your city burns?" Meryn asked, his voice stripped of sermon. "Our city burns and our city does not," Emion said. "Both are true. Do not look at me as if gravity were injured. It is not." Valyria took his arm and squeezed once, hard enough to hurt. "Mother?" she asked, and the question opened a space so wide that all 3 men fell quiet so as not to fall into it. "She wears a crown of stone over her chest and says it calms her," Emion said. "She will tell you later that she ordered me to leave. She did not. She blessed me and then pretended to have ordered me so as not to frighten father." "So he is frightened," Eldrick murmured, mostly to himself. Emion's smile tilted. "So he has decided that he was always powerful but only now is given an arena suited to him," he said. "He is building a new road in his head while others build them with their hands." "And you?" Valyria asked. "I have come to fetch you," he said simply. The beginning of all bargains is the moment when both parties believe they could still, if insulted sufficiently, walk away. Valyria looked at Maldron and Maldron looked at her, and neither of them pretended that they would be in a better position if they chose insult. She felt tea, the little iron disc in her pocket. He saw the iron in her posture. The city pressed itself around them like a friend who wants to eavesdrop. "I will stay," she said. Not because the decision was strategic, but because it felt like a straight line drawn through 2 points of difficult information. "I will send my dragon with you." Eemian opened his mouth to say a boyish thing, and she cut him with a look that had guided him out of mischief since he could run. "With men," she added, and he closed his mouth cheerfully again. "Kalex will not love it," he warned. "He will love what I ask," she said, confident in the way that frightens gods. "The road must be laid quickly," Maldron said into the space created by their plan, because he understood that letting the air fill with feeling would be dangerous. "We can make our way on land faster than the sea can learn new manners. We will need men with backs more than men with tongues," Eemian said. "Send both. Tongues will be required to tell the backs when to stop. We will need someone who knows how to take the heat out of a sulking stone," Valyria said, and Eldrick said, "Here," as if he had been called by his personal biography. So they made a caravan of it. Half sky, half honest road, all stubbornness. They fitted Kalex with a harness that could carry weight most men could not name. They lashed to him casks of fresh water and crates of instruments and a dozen things that would look to ignorant eyes like rituals and to educated eyes like physics. Eemian gathered men who understood how to pick up a wheel and run with it, and men who understood how to lower a fever in a building that had decided to develop one. Maldron lent him 10 who would obey no one else gladly, and would obey him even when he offended their pride. Eldrick put on shoes that did not suit his station and told his assistant to feed the ravens until he came back or until he did not. Merrin pressed a small bundle of herbs into Valyria's hand, as if she required him to fulfill a stereotype. "For fever," he said. "For fear," she corrected quietly, and he nodded once. The city watched them go with the particular hunger cities have for the spectacle of men and women deciding that their bodies will be offers. The river recommenced its habit of making everything seem reasonable. Kalex took the sky with Eemian at his side on Temis, and the two dragons made a geometry that would have delighted a mathematician and made him feel small. The road east out of Old Town is not called that because it dreams of empires. It is called that because it goes east. They took it as fast as a caravan can without insulting its own need for breath. The heat increased as if the air were being drugged. The birds fell away. The insects rose to replace them. Eldrick burned the soles of his feet one morning, not because the ground was hot, but because he had been thinking too much about ideas and not enough about where he had put his body. He did not complain. Complaining is often a way to steal an excuse, and he did not want one. They saw, on the second day, a family traveling west with their house on their backs. 2 parents, 3 children, a grandmother carried upon a litter. The father wore a piece of polished shell on a cord around his neck, and the mother wore a ring so heavy that her finger had begun to take its shape. They stepped aside and bowed to the dragons as they passed, not because they were eager to kneel, but because their story had informed them about protocols. Valyria stopped and stepped down and gave the grandmother water in a way that made the younger woman look at her with a face that would later tell 3 different versions of this event, one to each of her children. Eemian watched and pretended that he was checking the straps. On the 3rd day, they met a group of men from a village near the broken spur of a mountain that had been given a name by a poet. The men were covered in a fine gray powder that did not blow when they moved. They looked at the dragons as if the dragons were less surprising than the fact that the road was still flat. They asked for nothing. They did not thank anyone. They walked west with their faces arranged in a way that made Eldrick want to write a new chapter on how to describe expressions that resist description. He stopped and tried to speak to one. The man's eyes went beyond him as if something farther away had just asked him to sit down. Eldrick let him go. Eemian returned to the sky every few hours and then had to land again because he had told Temis he was the master and one cannot break one's own rules in front of one's dragon without losing moral standing forever. He led, then he followed, then he scouted, then he returned and spoke into Valyria's ear without ceremony. They did not argue. Maldron, who had never traveled at the pace of dragons, found the speed both luxurious and insulting. Merrin discovered that faith is steadier than his knees on a horse. Eldrick found that the earth had its own pace of information, and that he could not make it give up anything faster than it intended without making it lie. On the morning of the 4th day, the cloud on the horizon had the particular look that women's hair has after a day of grief. The air smelled of rock that had been taught impatience. Kalex voiced a low note that had no business being comforting and yet was. They climbed the last low rise before the long road descends into the plain that has always in old maps been labeled with names for fire, and there it was. The magnitude of damage is not beautiful, and yet it cannot be denied its own aesthetics. What had been towers were teeth chewed to nerves. What had been smooth had learned to be pleated. Smoke did not go straight up, but wandered in long, thoughtless stripes. A building that had been a school lay on its side like a man who has been punched too unexpectedly. A bridge the color of bruised grapes had held, absurdly, as if defying a god's fash. Valyria did not avert her face. Emian's lips went back from his teeth. Maldron swallowed in the practiced way that keeps one's throat from performing its own opinion. Eldrick put a hand to his chain and did not know whether he wanted to be the sort of man who prayed or the sort who calculated. Meryn did not pray aloud. He had learned a long time ago that some prayers run when they hear themselves named. They entered the city as one enters a house where the sleeping have been woken too soon. The dragons drew lines through the air, and men looked up and felt hope and then resented themselves for feeling it. Valyria split the party with rapid cuts of her hand, sent water with the dragon into the quarter where the vents had opened new mouths, sent Eldrick toward the Hall of Lenses where men used to play at predicting weather, sent Meryn with a group to the terraces where mothers held children as if the very air had snatched at their hair. Maldron she kept with her. If he was to see her city, let him see it. Let him fold it into his myth properly. They worked then. They worked not like heroes, but like men and women paying down a debt with the coin of their bodies. They moved stones that had decided to lay down. They carried heat in buckets and threw it into places heat did not wish to go. They spoke to men who had decided to stop speaking and coaxed their mouths back into the vowel shapes with small jokes and cups of something that tasted like wood. Valyria stood on a roof and shouted 6 names, only 2 of which she meant to be heard, and the right people answered all 6. Emian flew and dropped water and shouted laughter and insulted men into living. Kalex did things no one had ever asked a dragon to do, and made a note of the fact he had done them, and would later insist upon extra meat that was massaged properly. At sunset, Valyria stood on the sky bridge where she had stood before, and the light beneath the city was not the same light. It was light that had learned how to be careful. It was light that had fallen and stood up again with a small, new limp. She laid her hand on the railing, as if stone could be told that someone admired the way it held itself. Emian came to her without announcing himself and set his head on her shoulder the way he had done when he was smaller. She did not push him off. Maldron stood a decorous distance away and did not pretend to admire the view. Eldrick turned the glass candle on its side and told it he would not allow it to audition for his loyalty again without proper paperwork. In the night, under a sky that had decided to be black without theatrics, the city spoke quietly to itself, the way injured bodies do when strangers have finally left the room. The old empire had not fallen, not in the way of finality that makes poets happy to end a stanza. It had paused. It had drawn breath. It had been given an event with a name that would be argued over at tables for the rest of the century. In the morning, they would begin to ask questions that would make enemies pretend to be friends. In the afternoon, they would move stones and water and ladders and the fragile architecture of rivalry. In the evening, they would let 2 cups of wine be a liturgy and then sleep. Valyria watched the glow. Emian had fallen into a doze against her, and his weight made her feel strong. Somewhere, a glass candle lit itself for no one and then went out for everyone. Somewhere else, a boy who had seen a dragon for the first time began to sketch a dragon and fell in love with the hand that made the sketch. Old Town slept with the taste of salt in its mouth and dreamed a dream in which it learned a new way to be a city. The road between them held a line of ruts that men would lay their lives into in days to come. The sea remade its manners to better become a thing men could tell themselves they understood. The dragons slept. The gods, old and new and many and single, listened to human breath and did not explain themselves. Morning would bring emissaries trying to tally favors, and a meeting in a hall that was now missing one of its windows but had counts and candles and the ready cynicism every political animal uses as oil on its joints. It would bring, too, a woman who had admired a fish with a judge's face, and a man who had put his hands over his face and then taken them down, building something as large as grief and as useful as kindness. It would bring answers that asked to be treated as questions. it would bring work. For now, the Skybridge belonged to two children who had never been allowed to be simply that, and to the warm stone that had held more feet than anyone had ever counted, and to a woman who did not bow when bows would be returned with bruises and who now, against no one in particular, allowed herself the unguarded act of breathing in and out and letting that be enough for a moment before the city tapped her shoulder and reminded her she was what she had trained herself to be.